Welcome and good morning. Buenos dias, bon dia, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's such an honour to be here with you all at the first Global Summit on Economic Abuse. We are joining you today from all over the world, and I'm just delighted to be having this conversation today. My name is Moo Balch. I'm the chair of Australia's National Primary Prevention of Violence Against Women organisation, Our Watch. I'm also Director of Prevention at the Women and Girls Emergency Centre, which is a frontline service in Sydney, Australia here. And I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and I thank Indigenous people across the globe for their guardianship, their care, and their gentle caretaking of the land everywhere in the world. Today, I have the absolute privilege of facilitating a conversation as part of the Global Summit. I believe this is the first session of the summit. And it's a discussion which is really important because it's all about centering victim survivor voices. It's so important that we are listening and learning to people who have had experiences. For a long time, for many, many years, the work was just done by frontline services, by police and domestic and family violence specialist services. But what has evolved over the last few decades is quite remarkable. And part of that has been very much driven by survivors. And so I'd also like to acknowledge the survivors who are here with us today, wherever we are in the world. And so it's my great delight to introduce our panelists, Rosie Batty, a good friend, a household name in Australia, as Australian of the Year in 2015. Rosie spoke out after the terrible murder of her son Luke. Was a very public conversation, and Rosie has really shifted the conversation and the way that we think and talk about violence in families in Australia. David Challen, a domestic violence or domestic abuse advocate in the UK. You grew up with an abusive father and you've campaigned immensely. We've heard a lot about you here in Australia about the work that you've done, David, to free your mother, Sally, after she was incarcerated for killing your father after a lifetime of coercive control. And you've really shifted the conversation internationally in this space. And Dr. Seliwe Ndaba, a medical doctor in South Africa. Say, I hope I've got that kind of right.
Yeah.
Who went viral with your social media posts about the financial abuse that you're experiencing, really breaking that silence in a way that others hadn't heard about before. So I'd like to welcome all three of you and thank you so much for making time for this. Across the globe, we're going to be having a really important conversation today about economic abuse, how it impacts, what we can do about it, and how everybody can be part of the solution going forward. Rosie, if I can start with you, there are so many aspects to abuse, and we've learned a lot in the decade that you've been an advocate in this space. But I still think there are many people who wouldn't be aware that there were financial aspects of the abuse that you experienced. Can you talk to us a little bit about, that role, how that played out in your situation, please?
Yes, when I reflect back through the journey of my pregnancy, through the journey of me being a mother, I experienced all forms of abuse and didn't always recognize that they were abuse and what they looked like. And financial abuse was something that I didn't consider because I wasn't married to Luke's father. We didn't live together, but I was the person that had a mortgage and it was my home. I was the person that had a job and a regular income. I was the person that had a car. So I had all these things that I feel benefited me greatly, because through the coercive control, through all the mechanisms he would introduce to try to control me, manipulate me, abuse me, I always had that as my key advantage. He was someone that couldn't hold down a job, and so he was on Centrelink benefits. I now see that he was homeless, but again, all these things didn't look as obvious or as stereotypical. So when I found out I was pregnant, I had to begin to prepare for having the child, maternity leave, equipment, clothing, everything had to come from me. And if I asserted any kind of suggestion or pressure on him, he would become very abusive. And I can remember on one particular occasion when I really was very worried about how I was going to have to afford to take any time off work to have the child. He said, if you think I'm going to work so that you can sit on your fat ass, you've got another thing coming. So this whole, joy that should have been my pregnancy, this anticipation of the most amazing thing that was about to happen to me, was underpinned constantly by financial concerns. And then when I had my child, he didn't pay any child support or any contribution because I think I got $14 a fortnight or something for the duration of Luke's life. So that, so it was kind of his incapacity or refusal to contribute towards his child. So the financial pressure on me as a single parent to keep a roof over my head, to be able to work with no family support because my family were in the UK, was incredibly overwhelming and very exhausting and very taxing. So yes, I didn't recognise that the financial abuse I was experiencing, or the abuse I was experiencing, included financial abuse, because it didn't look like that to other people.
Yeah. And it wasn't language that we used particularly in those days either, right?
It wasn't recognised. It actually wasn't a form of abuse back then that was actually even recognised. We were still at that time really struggling to understand the different forms of abuse. It was still very recognised as really physical, and if it wasn't physical, it wasn't really that serious, or it wasn't really violence. It's only really quite recently here in Australia too, as you would know, that we are begun to talk about coercive control and to understand it in a way that it was incomprehensible at the time Luke was murdered. So, it's the journey I've had has been, as through my advocacy, has really been about challenging those myths and challenging the misconceptions and challenging the naivety and ignorance and the victim blaming, whilst we understand that, financial abuse really limits women's choices. We stay in abusive and violent relationships because it's the prospect of leaving is there are so many barriers to doing that.
Thank you, Rosie. So I'm really interested. You were also the primary breadwinner in your relationship. Can you share a little bit about that point, or maybe it was several points where you recognized that your experience amounted to economic abuse, because it wasn't something that we talked about? until the
Yeah, to be honest, as I'm listening to Rosie, I feel quite validated because there's a lot of, common aspects to what she's sharing. Firstly, I will say that I was also not aware that I was in a relationship where I was being financially abused. First of all, in my background as a Christian and also as an African, being a married woman, what I knew and understood is that if you are married to someone, you become one. So the whatever income that is brought to the household, it becomes the property of the two, because whatever you bring into the union, it actually belongs into the union. I got married to my ex fully knowing that he is not someone who is formally employed, that he's an entrepreneur and sometimes he does some odd jobs here and there. I was fully aware of the fact that being a medical doctor by profession, my family will most likely be leaning on the income that I bring home. So making the decision to have kids with him, I was aware of the fact that sometimes his jobs or whatever businesses that he was involved in might not be able to provide, and I would probably have to bear the burden for the rest of the family. So I understood that I would be expected to be a breadwinner. But what I wasn't aware of is how our financial reasoning is so different. He was more of the rich kind of a lifestyle. When I had the understanding that as a mom, we have to provide for the kids, we have to live a fairly affordable life, considering that we are virtually living on one income. So I think the aspect of abuse and cohesion, I see it mainly when I study now in retrospect, when I realize that if we are coming to the decision that we need to buy a car, he's like, no, he's not going to drive a humble car. He would much rather go for an expensive Mercedes Benz instead of driving like a normal car that's going to cater to the needs of the family. If we are now choosing a place for us to stay, he's like, no, he's not going to stay in the humble areas. He wants to stay in the more affluent areas, considering that we're not even buying, but we are renting. So when I'm listening to what Rosie was sharing about her story, I'm like, in the time that I was in the relationship, I was not aware that I'm actually being abused. I thought that I was doing my duties as a wife, being a nurturer to the rest of the family, filling up the gaps where my husband is not able to, and also in permitting or allowing him to have the things that he deemed were necessary, which were not necessary. Of course, I thought that I was just being caring,
Mm.
to my husband. But if you think about it now, or like when I think about it now, then I realized that coming to a decision to buy a car that was taking almost a whole third of my salary, when the other needs in the house were also still looking at my income, I now realize that that was a lot of coercion that was
Mm.
pushed and with abuse, because at the end of the day, he made the final decision, even though I was the one that was bringing the income home. So I've now come to understand like that was abuse. And as much as there was physical abuse and other forms of abuse in my marriage as well, I was not aware of the financial abuse aspect of it while I was in the relationship.
Yeah, it's so powerful, isn't it? When we believe that society is telling us that we are in this relationship to be equal, and yet everything in that relationship is telling you something different. And we don't get these messages as children, we don't get these messages as adults having relationships as we grow up. Do you think that's shifting? Do you think it's changing, say?
I think with the kind of conversations that we have started, and the kind of people that are having the conversations, like we're breaking the stereotype. Like I will say, like, for instance, in my community, people expect an uneducated woman who's not able to stand on her own 2 feet, who's not able to do much for herself, to be someone who actually stays in an abusive relationship. When you have a doctor coming to the front and saying, listen, I am educated, I make my own income, and I could have chosen to leave at any given point, but I'm one of the people that actually stayed in such a relationship. And I'm saying to you that if you are in a relationship with an abusive person, it's not because of your level of education. It's not because of your surroundings. It's just because you are with an abusive person. They will get to abuse you no matter what your demographics are like. I think with having those kind of people coming forward, like ourselves, making these like conversations and opening them up for people to have them, we're sort of breaking the stereotypes, and we're making people more aware that, listen, if you are doing something similar to what I was doing, although you might think that it's something that is acceptable in your culture, but you might be getting abused. So look at this and try to reason out that, are you doing this out of your own volition, or are you doing it because you are being coerced? Because if you are being coerced, then maybe there is an aspect of abuse in whatever it is that you are going through. So I think the conversations are helping. Also, because of the kind of people that are having the conversations, it's people across from all walks of life that now realize that, no, I don't have to hide behind my powerful profession. Just because I'm a medical doctor and I'm supposed to be someone who's deemed as smart, able to reason out because I belong to a noble profession, I can still be a victim of abuse. So when you see people like that who talk openly, it opens up the conversation even for like other people that wouldn't want to have the conversation.
So powerful. Thank
Yeah.
you. David, I want to bring your perspective in here because
Mm.
we've heard from two people who were both the primary earners in their homes, in their families, and they were both mothers. But your mum wasn't the primary earner. She was really dependent on your dad. How did that play out in your home?
So my home was, I guess, like a upper middle class kind of facade, and so everything kind of looked in order to me, and it was almost a traditional mindset that I thought my family lived under, of he was the earner and she did everything else. So I never saw the conversations that happen behind closed doors, the constant begging and needing to pay money. I didn't, when I started to campaign to free my mother, it was learning more about the story that kind of reeked an atmosphere in my home that I lived in as a child. So, when my mama killed my father in 2010, this was pre coerced control laws. And so, very much my campaigning was understanding what coerced control was and foraging throughout my life what was, I guess, the foreground of my memories, but looking around at the background, what happened behind those closed doors to kind of breed this suffocating atmosphere that was coercion and control. And a large part of it was economic abuse because it restricted her autonomy to leave. So those levers, what were they like? It was kind of like she couldn't get she would not work, I think, up until the age when I was 13. And so to get any kind of pin money, she'd clean for friends and family. Um, Constantly have to beg my father to pay utilities when she started to work, because he then burdened her with most of the economic costs of that, despite him, being far and away the breadwinner, but putting her on a mortgage and giving her financial burdens. And a lot of the finances that we spoke about earlier were not going towards the family. They went, I think, when I reached my adolescence, it was maybe definitely to pursue a more cavalier life. Started to buy a Ferrari, went on these trips, and it was, it kind of exerted more control, more financial independence he had, the more leverage he had over my mother. And I think very much when I think about my story, I kind of order it in a way that it shouldn't be ordered. I think about coercive control, I think about post-separation abuse, I think about economic abuse, but each of those is so intrinsically powerful to escalate all of it, which is coercive control of the beating heart of domestic abuse. And it very much restricted when I started to forage throughout my mother's life, the attempts my mother tried to leave my father. It just restricted her financial autonomy. Anyone that has the ability to leave is the most amazing, powerful thing that someone can do. Obviously, it escalates and there needs to be support. But the only chance that my mother had was when my grandmother passed away and bequeathed an inheritance to her that allowed her to actually action that autonomy to her. But very much in the home, it was the ability, that she would have to always, even with my brother and I, wouldn't ask anything of my father, even for a £5 note, it was just the idea, it was almost that he was on this dais that was so many levels above you. You'd have to kind of climb some massive staircase and just get to it and feel this weight of responsibility that he would throw down upon you. Obviously this is within a life that was littered with, verbal humiliation, gaslighting we would hear in routine. So, this was the forefront of my life, and what was around it that kind of cemented her autonomy to not be able to leave was that economic abuse. And not to scupper any kind of conversations afterwards, but it very much was exercising control when my mother tried to leave my father, when she left. Post-separation abuse then was enacted when my father saw her lack of independence and ability to survive without him, and preyed upon that vulnerability and gave her a post-separation agreement, to carry out a post-nuptial agreement that would be signing away the financial assets to the home, financially far significant less than she was entitled to, that economically abused her further, and then would make her I guess almost like a tenant in his home if they got back together. So it's throughout everything I've ever done, the economic levers and the awareness of perpetrators that use it almost as a chessboard. It is, the shifting scales of what enacts an ability for a victim to or survivor to leave or have that autonomy to leave, but also exert even more control. So it's a really unseen, misunderstood othering of abuse that I find that needs to be a real center point for when we think about these situations that are incredibly volatile.
It's incredibly powerful because I think all three of you have just spoken about, the power and control that we know sits behind every abusive relationship, but also the social sanctioning of those behaviors and the way that society around us says these, values and attitudes are just normal, and perpetrators of violence we know very much rely upon that. And you've used that quite horrific but very true image of like a chessboard, that sort of the manipulation that that somebody experiences when they're being abused in a relationship. Rosie, you and I have been working together for years and years now and having this conversation in one country on one side of the world. We know this is happening across the globe, but we still have this common myth, or that perception that once you leave, the violence is going to stop, everything's going to go back to some sort of normal. Can you talk through a little bit about the systems abuse, how difficult it can be when you make that choice, that the relationship is over, and how that often manifests post-separation?
Yes, I think, that question, why doesn't she just leave, which really is such a victim blaming question when there are so many reasons that it's impossible or difficult or incredibly dangerous to leave. I've spent a lot of my years of advocacy really challenging that question. And ultimately, we know that around that point of leaving and the planning to leave is when a woman is at her greatest risk of harm. But I don't think anybody ever considers how creative perpetrators can be in the different ways they can find to continue to abuse you. And whether there is a little chink, they will find it, and they will. It's like there's some kind of rule book somewhere that has been written, or a blueprint that they all kind of have access to. But I certainly had no idea what, every time something else happened, I couldn't believe it was possible. So yes, deliberately taking you to court, where you would show up to court and they didn't, and no accountability was ever, never made accountable. Where deliberately taking you into the family law system, and that wasn't my journey, but I have met many of those women who, once their life is starting to move forward, their partner, their ex-partner, will take them through the family law court system to deliberately financially ruin them. Because again, those that have the financial advantage can manipulate the systems to their advantage as well. So I think, again, custody of children and the fights that you have to go through, and how the systems are seemingly biased to disbelieve women and minimize the risk to children. And unfortunately, I think that's still very strong here in Australia. Although I would like to think here in Victoria, at least, our magistrate court systems have dramatically improved. But it is, just the abuse of non-payment of child support. Our systems again enable and allow that. And often I did the same thing to relieve pressure and to show perhaps some misguided compassion for letting them off the child support payments and their debt, feeling that they may, if they don't have so much pressure, they may be less abusive, and realizing that it doesn't stop. So yes, abusive non-payment of child support, and our systems enabling that and not making those people, perpetrators, accountable, using the court systems, deliberately disrespecting intervention orders. Again, back in the, some years ago when I had Luke, police did not take seriously breaches of intervention orders. And so again, it was something that you had to do, sometimes because of pressure by child protection, and sometimes by pressure from the police and pressure from family. And sometimes taking out an intervention order appears, an incredibly risky and dangerous thing to do, and one that you very, very reluctantly do, because you are taking control and you really, really don't know what might happen. And so, again, maybe the gaslighting, being made to look that you're the crazy one. And again, police misunderstanding and misjudging who are the perpetrators and who are the victims. And again, that happens too often. So yes, the way that they can continue to undermine you, demean you, confuse you, gaslight you, continue to abuse you, continue to stalk you, turn your children against you, turn friends and family against you. It can be, for some women and their children, utterly unrelenting, unrelenting. And even when they commit the worst of crimes, the most horrendous injuries, and they are imprisoned, they don't let up. They will continue to stalk, harass, and come out of prison. And you are still never safe. You are only safe when they choose to stop being violent. And it seems these types of perpetrators never stop being violent and move on to other relationships and have more children and continue the abuse. So yeah, it is astonishing to me how our systems can be manipulated and misused, and where victims are continually fighting so hard for the very system that should be protecting them, protecting the perpetrator.
Mm. David, I'm interested in your perspective on this because you've talked a little bit about the the prenup arrangement that your dad coerced your mum or tried to coerce your mum into signing to make her a tenant in her own home.
Mm.
And you've also talked about the suffocation, that feeling of how was that for you as a child living, or a young person living in that environment where you can see this continual systems abuse and economic manipulation going on?
I think it was just that constant tension around money and fear and escalation. Just seeing my mother kind of being so subservient, it was like you just had to kind of put a request and hope it doesn't impact on her too badly and know the repercussions of that. Not only in just the silence that he could kind of deliver that would kind of swallow her whole, but also any verbal escalation that was predominantly from my father, and how this is just, there was no language at all for it back then. And to obviously go back and say, it's 10 years since coercive control legislation in England and Wales this year. And I very much look around and I feel like we're perhaps maybe year 2 or 3 in our understanding of it, and understanding what it's the impact on children predominantly is what I discuss and talk about in my life, because so readily that children are not seen in these homes, and the impact of that, of the dependence and the scarcity, the thinking of obviously scarcity and worrying and developing anxiety about money, how it influences you growing up and your trust and your independence. You manage your economic finances, and it breeds especially in a victim and a survivor, a dependency to not be able to live on your own or survive on your own, obviously, because this is all underpinned by coercion and control, not just the standalone economic abuse. It's all threaded through in the actions of economic abuse, but and that you're told that you're not going to survive. He used to say to me and my brother, you'll get nothing when I die. I'll have spent it all, you're going to be left with nothing. Very much I always felt, if you gave my father enough money, he would sell us down the river, which is probably the most damning truism that I could probably phrase about my father. That we were actually assets ourselves in that home, the commodities of life that allowed him to have the pleasantries and be seen on the social circuit as a charismatic man that would be accepted and loved. And when he went and had his afterlife with buying that Ferrari, he'd take my mother on these Ferrari owner trip holidays around Europe. And, my mother would come with them, but I knew she was only there as an accessory to get into these places, and that, she was there always as an accessory to his enjoyment and discarded as such. So as much as it impacted my mother, it bled into me this idea of survivorship, which I've largely explored or allowed myself to attain in the last couple of years, and how that impacts and permeates into adulthood. Those patterns and how it breeds into this worry of self-dependence, this worry over tension around money. I still today have this innate worry about it. Although I'm very comfortable, I got addicted to gambling, as a re-traumatized permutation of harm, and how we should also look at services that don't normally respond or set up to respond to seeing a victim or survivor around economic abuse or domestic abuse. Obviously the banking sector and how it picks up, or if someone's intercepting your mail and then exercising some economic punishment on that victim because maybe the perpetrator's been intercepting it. Just these ideas and mechanisms that need to be communicated across everyone. I'm an ambassador for an organization here called the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse that sees it fit for every employer to have a response on domestic abuse. And I believe strongly in that because it impacts everyone. It's a massive part of the jigsaw. My mother spoke to friends, she spoke to family, she spoke to colleagues, her employer. Every single one of these, we would pray a victim or survivor has the ability to reach out to one, but she reached out to all of them. And so I always think of 10 years of cross control legislation, at least in England and Wales, and many jurisdictions are doing better than us. That's great, but learning from where we might be getting it wrong is the sense of urgency, and that it is not just a phrase. Domestic abuse is everyone's business. It is. If economic abuse is too, and how it develops always, especially obviously we always talk about the family court, but it is just those economic levers, those with the most power and resources, exert the most power and control. And I would say if you're a family lawyer, you are part of those levers and should be attuned to what you're helping enact and what you can help maybe think about how you can mitigate that harm and suppress it as much as legally possible.
This is everybody's business, right? Once you know, you can't unknow this stuff. And I think that's the shift that I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years in this space. Is it's gone way beyond individual stories. We're looking at this as a global movement to end gender-based violence. So Lewa, I'm really interested because you started posting videos about your experiences on social media, which was something that didn't exist 10 years ago in the same way. And you went viral. What, in those initial kind of, when you were just starting to post, what was in your mind? And, what was the broader kind of journey that you've taken on social media?
So when I started posting, I was already in separation from my ex. And I guess I was introspecting on a lot of decisions and a lot of things that I did while I was in the marriage, because I was already taking a journey where I was trying to fix some of those mistakes. So I was looking at the enormous amount that I now had to settle with the bank because it was a shortfall of a car that I actually never drove, that was being driven by this man. And I was like, my goodness, this must have been the worst financial mistake of my life. And I was like, I'm going to go on social media and I'm going to talk about this. I need to warn some women who are in marriage. Like, basically, my thoughts were, I just want to share about the worst financial mistake of my life that I did while I was in a marriage that has now ended. So I wanted to create awareness. And at that time, I hadn't coined it that this was financial abuse. I thought I was just sharing about the worst mistake I did that was financial at the time. So when I started speaking about it, then a lot of other people that picked on the story, they started speaking and pinpointing that, oh, but you were actually being abused. And I was like, no, but in my culture, if you are married, you cover your husband's back. According to my church, we are one. So it was my culture, my church beliefs, and just the society that I grew up in. And I was like, no. And then by people engaging me more and more on my posts, then I realized, my goodness, I was actually being financially abused. I thought I was embracing the role of being, a breadwinner in my relationship and just being there for my family. Actually, I was being abused. So the aim of me sharing the story ended up changing from just creating awareness. And I was now more inclined to wanting to allow people to have conversations and wanting to listen to other people's stories and hosting lives, even on TikTok, listen to other women like share their stories of domestic abuse, where I realized that most of the women that are in relationships that are financially abusive, most of them are actually being physically abused as well. They are being emotionally abused. There is a lot that is intertwined in this abuse. It's not just like one form of abuse that is operating in isolation. So me sharing my story, it was very simple, but I didn't realize that I was actually opening up myself to more conversations and allowing other people who are moving in the same social spaces to also share their own stories. So it's been a beautiful journey, because not only did I just share my story, I also ended up like creating connections with other people across like from different walks of life, and also had people who wanted to pour into me, people that wanted to teach me more about what I had gone through, and also people that wanted to empower other people. Yeah, so like it's wild, but I think it broadened up my perspective and also made me to understand what exactly I was going through in that marriage.
It's a really beautiful and generous description of
Mm.
how that journey has been for you. What's your hope, for the future? What do you think needs to change next? Because this is an early conversation that we're having, right? We've got a long way to go still. Where do you
Yeah.
see this?
One of the things that I usually highlight when I speak is that I wish for women especially to understand the importance of being empowered. And then once they are empowered, to understand also that just because you're an empowered woman and you are independent in your own right, that does not make you immune to experiencing abuse. That is my story, that you can be someone who's independent and who's able to stand on their own, but still be a victim of abuse because of maybe because of culture or because of the norms and values that our churches enforce on us. So you have to understand that the way in which abusers think or operate can still penetrate through to even someone who is as learned or as independent as you are. So I want for women to empower themselves firstly, to absorb the knowledge and to listen to other conversations, understand other women's experiences, and know how to protect themselves, to be able to, notice patterns of abuse even from far, and also understand that it is okay to leave. When you are in a situation where you realize that you are being oppressed, where you are being controlled, where you are being coerced, you can make a decision to leave and start afresh. To protect yourself and to also protect your offspring if you've got children. Because I think one of the powerful things that I've realized by, having broken away from that marriage is that I'm surviving, I'm living. Like my kids are okay. I think one of the things that we fear is that we have the fear of the unknown, like what will happen to my kids? What will happen to me? But I think my hope is for women to see that, yes, I was in a marriage that I had put on a pedestal, that I'd even decided, to stay through the abuse and do a lot of things that I now regret. But after leaving that kind of a relationship, I'm now in a point where I'm like, oh my goodness, I wish I had made the decision to leave sooner, because life is not that bad. Like there is life after abuse, and you can still thrive after abuse. You can still achieve your dreams, and you can be something that is much better than what you were when you were in that situation. So that is my message really to women. It's about empowering women to speak, to use their voices, but it's also about saying you can leave, and after leaving, you'll still have a full life and your kids can still be fine.
Thank you, Zoe. Rosie, one of the first challenges you put out there, not long after Luke was murdered, was I remember going to a breakfast somewhere and it was in a bank. And I remember you calling out leaders and saying, you have a responsibility to do something in this space. And the Commonwealth Bank and others in Australia and banks and financial institutions all over the world have taken action for all sorts of different reasons. In the UK, it's been very driven by legislation and the coercive control journey that has happened there. But here in Australia, we have really been led by that challenge that you gave us in terms of banks responding to victim survivors of family violence and economic abuse. What's the progress that you've seen, and where do you think we need to go next?
Look, I think there has been a massive amount of effort to understand the part that they need to play. And I think the conversations initially that I remember were, considering material aid and crisis response assistance and things like that. But I always kept thinking, well, how do you prevent violence? How do you prevent the abuse? It's too late. The violence has already occurred. So using this is your core business. So using your expertise, using your understanding and knowledge, how can you prevent that? And so I think that that's what I hope has started to take into account. Women being coerced into loans, accountable for running up debts and parking fines and leases and all of these things that again deliberately financially abusing. So I think that those they can be quite intricate, and again everybody's on a journey. But I do feel that they have. The Commonwealth Bank has I think led in Australia. But we live in a patriarchal society where when I grew up, the man was the breadwinner and the person who led the household. And I didn't grow up in a violent family, but my dad had his meals on his table, cooked by his wife, and he earned the money and gave housekeeping. And so I think that, we are still conditioned in some ways of thinking it's a man's role to take financial responsibility. And I really want to see a lot more younger women who are financially empowered and not falling into the gender stereotype that we have been led to understand and to see is the way that we operate and function. And I think that it is a journey that we're all kind of part of. And even for myself, it's a tendency to think someone's going to look after you or somebody's going to rescue you. But ultimately, I think by talking about the different ways that we can be financially empowered and to be astute, I still find it astonishing how we're all, so many of us are getting married without even considering the agreement that we're entering into and the construct, I guess, that we're finding ourselves in, and then without questioning, as you did, Sally, with feeling that we're now part of we are a couple, but that how financially vulnerable you are when you surrender your dreams, your facets, your finances. And I'm a mature woman now, probably more mature than, and I see the vulnerability with with mature women as they enter into new other relationships, and how important it is to protect your assets and in your vulnerability, and I guess desire to be in a happy relationship, just how often that power imbalance is, and how you can again be manipulated and coerced, and find yourself being exploited. So I think it's really important for us to understand that financial abuse is insidious, it's subtle and not so subtle. It can be refusing to pay child support payments and minimising your income to avoid paying at the tax time, so that you're not paying the amount that you should be, and putting your ex-partner and your children into financial hardship. It can come in so many different ways. It can be that threat that once you leave, your lifestyle will come to nothing because you have nothing of your own. And so you're trapped into a life that brings you a lot of unhappiness, but the alternative is homelessness, hardship. And so, you know, it's like the more we understand it and talk about it and see it, the more we can recognize it and prevent it, I guess.
Thank you, Rosie. David, you've written a book about your childhood, and you're very well known internationally for your campaigning, and you've talked a bit about your own relationship as well. And you've referenced earlier that you got support from, it wasn't a frontline domestic abuse service, it was a gambling service. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think we all default to domestic abuse services, police being the answer, or the place where, if we knock on that door, we're going to get the answer, or the ear that understands somebody's experience. I'm really interested in your observations on that.
Yeah, so I've helped free my mother in a quite big case. My mother killed my father in 2010. It's not a justification, it's an understanding for the escalation of acts that followed. I think it's important to say that, who anyone is new to my story. Obviously, I've written a book. This is backwards, but it's called The Unthinkable. I think it was a necessary book for me to read. The actual house, that's my actual house on it. That shows that pristine frontage and the suffocating, that's the whole vibe of it. It's the idea that I had to write this book as a kind of survivorship thing. Otherwise, I'd be swallowed whole if I don't affirm that I am a survivor of domestic abuse that I never allowed myself to say. But what picked me up into being able to write that book was, reaching the bottom of the bottom and getting lost in exercising some trauma through my own kind of attempt to have financial control in my life. I got some money I wasn't expecting, and there was some trauma that was going on at the same time that I hadn't remonstrated with, and I'd had no services all this whole time ever kind of reach out to me, despite me kind of always speaking and engaging with people. Even it doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing, even us. It's always we always have to revisit where we are, how we're looking after ourselves, not over expanding what we're doing. But in terms of how I came to gambling, it was just a way to control something in my life in a time that I didn't have any control to understand my path or my trauma lay behind me. Namely, I think because there are so few stories like mine, or like children, or economic abuse generally, that are out in the world. I've always tried to get coerced control into a soundbite through doing loads of news articles, and not news articles, but news interviews. And it's an impossibility. It is, unfortunately, it is, because we're talking about something about that's so bespoke to a victim. Apart from economic abuse, where the levers are apparent but are always developing, we always need to share our stories and have moments like this, so we can use it as a template for not only professional but societal curiosity, almost like a police officer attending a domestic abuse related incident, you want it to be like it's a fire that, as soon as that door opens, you feel the heat. With the circumstance that someone explains their life and put at the thread of what they understand, is the key to this. And that obviously is based in financial literacy from an early age and understanding what domestic abuse and healthy relationships are, not just as a preventive measure to help victims and survivors spot it, but also to assert to the perpetrators that walk around this world and exist, and who will grow up from classrooms and know that this is abuse. If you enact these mechanisms of control or financial power over someone, that is domestic abuse, that's domestic violence, and it's a legislative feature that can put you in jail. And this is the thing that we have to kind of bleed in from a younger age into adolescence, into schools. Here we're trying to cover it between the ages of 16 and 18, where there's no coverage for relationship and sex education, where healthy relationship is explained, because a lot of young adolescents and obviously who are teenagers go off into universities and in their own microcosms and normalize these actions of abuse. It didn't take until my mother was on remand in prison to go on a domestic abuse course and suddenly realized that the controller of the money, the king of the house, and all these archetypal roles in a freedom program course, it just was pulled to the thread of what she had normalized and thought it was all normal. So this shepherd of my life was in fact the lost sheep. And I think that's a powerful way to look at everyone in this world and how we walk. And, I live in London, everyone marches around really angry, we can kind of get closed off and shut off. But whoever thinks that you have it held together is someone that perhaps doesn't. And it's all our autonomy and responsibility to talk about this freely and not see it as an othering of it's a difficult topic to talk about in a workplace or to create awareness to. It's like you have an opportunity to save someone's life. Will CCTV cameras hanging on a wall have the opportunity to outreach to someone and say, if you see these mechanisms that help, show that there's support. And I think in terms of me being an adult child survivor that's picked up by a gambling service, I never thought that would be the best response ever. But obviously, as a financial duty for gambling charities to put large amounts of money in the pot, that's why they picked me up. But it just shows every service should have a response to this. Every service should be aware to this and attuned to this. There's so much fruition to sharing survivor stories like ourselves and using that template of harm and survivorship and the positivity that comes from after it, and reading our books and our stories and following our social channels that shows there's so much learned lived ability that we can exercise and share, and have a community that is free and wanting to express these lives that are part of us, that don't define us but are part of our journeys.
David, Rosie, Siloe, I want to say a huge thank you to all three of you, because you, through your advocacy, through sharing your experiences through some of the most challenging and difficult times in your life, you are shifting the conversation in the world. We were not having a conversation about economic abuse and financial abuse 10 or 15 years ago. This is something that we are now having internationally, and you are all a really critical part of that conversation. I think you've all talked about those touch points of every service, every company, every business, every government department, every employer having a responsibility here. If I can ask each one of you just very quickly, is there anything you would like to share, given the audience for this International Global Summit on Economic Abuse, to people across the globe, starting with you, David?
Goodness. I want people to see the family environments of these homes. That's not just obviously economically abusing women, who are the most and foremost primary victims, most affected victims group, and have a response to different minoritized Black women, migrant survivors of domestic abuse. It's such a pertinent topic right now. societally across the world that we need to see. But yeah, speaking as a child that lived in a home without the language set me and my mother free. It continues to be the liberation that I've always wanted. So having that language from the start of education and bleeding it all the way through into our adult life, into employment, is key.
Thank you, David. Dr. Say, what's your last observation for us, sharing with an international audience?
I just appreciate how like these kind of conversations are being had, and I just want to reiterate the fact that these conversations are important, and they are important in order to change and to shift the narrative, like to help people to move away from victim blaming, but rather become supportive and also assist people that have been like victims in such situations. It's so eye-opening and it's powerful because, at this point, we're dealing with things like gender-based violence, and to have such topics and such, things being spoken about, I think it's going to teach, especially our culture, to also try to shift away from, the patriarchal society that we're living in, and to really break those gender stereotypes. And also, it's also, I think for me, it's assisting in us like to shape up young women and to allow them to take up space despite their experiences, like to fully empower them and to make them understand that they still have got a standpoint in this world and they still have got a voice. So I think what I appreciate about, these summits and these conversations being held is that we are really truly being given a voice.
Thank you so much. Thank you for empowering the next generation to be able to have these conversations. Rosie, any last observations from you?
It's always difficult to find that one lesson or that one thing, but I guess what stands out to me is you're not alone. And I think that when we do share our stories and when we do speak up, when we do find ourselves in this area of advocacy, where we're in a position to be able to use our experience to make change, you realize you are not alone. And yet, being a victim of abuse can be incredibly isolating. And when you've had a terrible, tragic situation like David has, like I have, you feel incredibly isolated because your experience is different to anyone else you might know. So I think for me, it's been really a journey. And at the worst of my times, I felt very abandoned, very isolated, and very, very alone. But by connecting with people who understand, professions involved in this journey, campaigning and working every day for change, the like-minded people, the passionate people, friends and family that have love you, it makes you realize you're not alone. So that's what came to mind.
Beautiful. And that's what we want every survivor to know. We've talked a lot today about some big issues. If you need to get access to local services, there is a link in the No More Global Directory of Specialist Services. Please do reach out and get help, whether it's from a frontline service, a specialist, or whether it's from a friend or a family member, whether it's your employer, somebody you trust. Please have that conversation. A huge thank you to all of the panel. I am just overwhelmed by the conversation that we've had. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and for the shifts that you are making globally in this space. It's incredibly powerful, and I thank you on behalf of survivors everywhere.